A man gobbling up meat passes by as a young boy named Fate, who's on guard duty in the Blilik household, and observes him with eager eyes. Just then, 3 of the Holy Knights show up, and amongst them is Raphael, who assaults Fate for being insignificant. He hurls money at him, telling him to pick it up as a token of thanks because a scumbag like him doesn't deserve to be paid. He makes fun of him for being one of the Holy Knights and asserts that other more qualified applicants would be far more talented and deserving than he is. Just then, they all hear his stomach growl and Raphael kicks him in the stomach, proclaiming that they have fed him enough already. They order him to stand up, but when he can't because of the blow to the abdomen, Raphael stomps his head and continues to pester him. Just then, one of the other Holy Knights who goes by the name Roxy arrives and demands them to behave towards their fellow knights with admiration. Roxy walks up to Fate to see how he's doing after they are all made to leave with scowls on their faces. When she calls him by his name, he finds himself unable to accept that anyone would deem him deserving enough to remember his name. Roxy assists him in standing up and then asks him to go and rest while she keeps an eye on the gate. She also says that if Fate is ever harassed by Raphael and the others again, she would deal with them on her own. When Fate hears this, he immediately flees, declaring it unnecessary. He does not want Roxy to get engaged with his bullies as it would only halt her path to a higher rank. We learn about the state of the world as Fate strolls through the streets with an empty stomach. In this universe, each person is born with a special skill. A skill is considered a blessing from God, but some people are devoid of this blessing. These individuals are often looked down on in society. Fate also has a skill called gluttony, which is useless as it only makes him excessively hungry. He only became a knight because of his ancestors, and due to his useless skills, he is constantly ridiculed by the other knights. After covertly checking up on Roxy, he returns to find 3 intruders scaling the east wall, which is in her blind spot. He swiftly returns to the palace and warns her of the criminals, and Roxy assuredly asks him to keep watch on the door while she takes care of the issue on hand. It is evident that Fate feels a great deal about Roxy as she marches away. When it gets all dark and quiet and there is no sign of Roxy, Fate ponders if she has succeeded to repel off attackers already. As he is occupied in his thoughts, one of the intruders with one arm cut off finds a way past her view and starts reaching the gate. He commands Fate to move aside, but Fate reflects on how Roxy would be solely responsible for this man's actions if he were to fail to stop him because she was the one maintaining surveillance. He collects all of his strength and rushes with every ounce of strength toward the man. Luckily, he manages to strike him with his spear, slaying him in the process. As he recollects his thoughts, he sees that his skill gluttony has been activated and that he is gaining stat points from the man he just executed. Fate also states how his stomach feels full, meaning it isn't food that fills his stomach, but instead, it is combat. As all of his stats increase, he additionally acquires the skills of appraisal and mind reading. Just then, Roxy makes her way back to the gate and confesses her apologies for allowing one of the invaders to get past her. She jolts Fate to bring him back after noticing that he appears to be dozing off. She asks if he is fine, and Fate acts as if nothing occurred. As he gains his awareness, he asks Roxy not to disclose anything he did, meaning he wants her to take praise for all the killings. She declines at first since Fate also killed one of them, but adheres to his request as it would only cause him trouble if Raphael finds out. She expresses her gratitude to Fate for alerting her about the intruders and says that if Fate hadn't done so, she would have harmed the Hart family's image. Additionally, she offers Fate an invitation to work for the Hart family as a way of appropriately thanking him for his assistance. She further claims her dad will be delighted to have him on board after he learns about his heroics today, but Fate is reluctant as his skill is ineffective. In addition, the Blilik family, for whom he already works, won't be as lenient towards him. Roxy assures him that she will handle this situation and asks him to head home as it is already too late. She does, however, request that he stop by their home the next day so that she can talk to her father about him. He bows to Roxy with tears in his eyes, making it clear just how happy he is in the moment. The next day, Fate dreams of standing over dozens of dead bodies and awakens wondering if the previous night's events were also a dream. He then recalls hearing a voice when he killed one of the attackers. The voice informs him of his new abilities, appraisal and mind reading, and he opens his stats monitor to see them. He is astonished to see that all of his stats have significantly increased and that he has obtained 2 new skills. Fate also recalls how the voice within him was activated after Roxy touched him, alleging that it was the result of his skill gluttony. He finally realizes the real intent of his power, which is to murder opponents and turn their lives into strength, and his skill no longer feels so pointless. Filled with enthusiasm and a new purpose, Fate visits the Seifert business district to procure himself a new weapon. He only has 2 silver coins, so he'll have to settle for some inexpensive local weapons. As he walks about the neighborhood, one of the shopkeepers catches him looking for an arsenal and invites him to check through his inventory. The merchant gently inquires about his budget, but his attitude flips immediately upon learning of Fate's money situation. He shows him the discarded weapons and tells him that with the money he has, he can only afford them. Having no other choice, Fate decides to inspect the weapons and is surprised to learn that he is able to review weapon stats using his appraisal skill. He realizes that all the weapons are useless and wishes there was something remotely usable in the stack. Just then, he comes into contact with a black sword, which speaks to him and encourages him to purchase it. Fate is taken aback when he encounters a talking blade, and the shopkeeper demands that he leave if he does not wish to purchase anything. He realizes that he is the only one who can hear the sword and decides to wield it. He wonders if the sword is cursed and decides to check its stats too. When he examines, he merely gets the title of the sword and its form on the monitor, which is strange given that he can view the performance characteristics for various weapons as well. He notices that the sword, similar to his, is being treated as trash and decides to buy it because they both have a comparable history. The sword introduces itself as greed and declares that Fate should be honored to be able to hold it. The shopkeeper becomes impatient and harshly requests that Fate leave, who smacks the 2 coins onto his desk and goes out menacingly. After wandering about, Fate decides to look for goblins in a neighboring field, which is suitable for rookies like him. Greed warns him not to get overly excited as goblins might easily swarm him. Later, when he arrives at the capital's south gate, he is surprised to see it crammed with warriors. As he announces his desire for hunting companions, one of the warriors approaches him and invites him to join up because his duo is unable to make it today. However, he promptly flees as Fate notifies him that he is merely level 1. Greed suggests that he gives up his plans to form a party because no one is interested in teaming up with a level 1, and Fate realizes that he's on point in this regard. Greed then urges him not to expose his gluttony to everyone, which surprises him because he has never spoken to Greed about his abilities. He asks how he learned about his powers, and Greed tells him it is because the two are remarkably alike. He then adheres to Greed's advice as he can get killed if people find out about his power. Fate is determined to grow so powerful that no one can touch him, so he decides to start small by hunting goblins. Goblins have made their home to the south of the capital called the Goblin Field, and they attack every passenger and carriage that passes through that area. When Fate arrives at the field, he discovers a lone goblin sleeping on the grass. He uses his appraisal to check its stats and sees that it is a goblin fighter by name, making it certain that there are other types as well. The stats on the goblin are much lower than his own and has a skill called Strength Up with small written in parentheses. Seeing the goblin open, he advances it and kills it with a single slash, granting him not only additional stat points but also the goblin's small Strength Up skill. Greed cautions him not to become too distracted when he relishes his achievement, as it could all end in an instant. Fate claims that he has only ever fled at the sight of a monster until today, so celebrating his minor win is reasonable. Following his rejoices, he recalls that goblin ears are valuable and can be traded for only 10 copper coins, so he goes on to gather and slay more of them. He eventually comes across 2 of them, one with a shield and the other with a sword. He checks their stats to see that one of them is a guard-type goblin and figures that the two work together as a group by covering each other's backs. He considers killing the fighter first, but is unsure because it will be difficult if the guard blocks his strike. Fate has no past fighting experience, therefore he needs to make sure he kills them on impact, or else events can quickly turn sour for him. With that thought in mind, he clutches the blade firmly and marches with all his might toward them. As he advances toward them, the goblins become aware of his presence, prompting the guard to put up his shield. Fate's face expresses worry because he has no backup plans if the attack is halted. However, to his luck, his sword Greed effortlessly cuts through the goblin's shield and eliminates it, giving him more stat points and a new skill called Stamina Up Small. As he is still in shock at Greed's power, the fighter goblin tries to attack him, but he manages to kill him quickly in one blow, granting him even more stat points. However, he does not get an additional fighter skill, which makes him wonder if he can only acquire one of each skill. He concludes that if he wants to learn new skills, he'll have to seek out other kinds of monsters. After killing a number of goblins, he asks Greed why he was in the trash despite being such a strong weapon. Greed responds that it is because he chooses his own wielders, to which Fate mockingly responds that it implies he acknowledges him as his wielder. Greed tells him to shut up in humiliation, but despite it being foul-mouthed, Fate wants to live up to its expectation and become stronger since it chose him as a wielder. After gathering dozens of goblin ears, he decides to examine his stats and is shocked to see the results. His strength, stamina, and agility all have risen to over 1,000, but surprisingly his level is still 1. Greed explains that it's because he possesses one of the sacrilegious abilities, which prevents him from getting the sphere's blessing, gluttony. Taking the stats and talents of those you murder implies a rejection of the divine concept of levels. As a result, people like Fate fail to receive God's blessing. This is why all of his stats were at level 1 when he was born. Greed is about to share something significant to Fate, but decides to keep it concealed for the time being. He requests that Fate return to the capital before it becomes dark, and Fate agrees because he's extremely hungry and has had enough for the day. Before leaving, he decides he will go into the dark forest the next time, where he may encounter a hobgoblin. which is a much more powerful variant of a normal goblin. He returns to the capital with his bag of goblin ears and walks into the guild to see two members quarreling. The rumor of the guild's situation began to spread, but it is much more serious than Fate had been expecting. As he reaches the counter, he sets the bag down on the table and requests an exchange as the two members start fighting. The lady behind the counter opens the bag of goblin ears and asks if Fate was with a large group when he hunted these. She further says that he must have drawn a lot of aggro hunting this many goblins, which he has no idea about. She explains that if a person kills several monsters of the same kind in a single day, the monsters develop hatred against the slayer and begin targeting him. This is why people typically only kill 10 of each monster in a single day. Fate admits he had no idea such a thing existed and claims this is why he was able to fight so many goblins. The lady remarks that he must be dressed in rags because he has battled so much, but she is unaware that this is Fate's finest attire, which embarrasses him. As she leaves to grab his reward, Fate wonders what he should have for dinner. Later, Greed expresses how dissatisfied he is in such a situation and recommends Fate clean him up before he goes to supper. It further says he needs to give it adequate care after every fight, as it is equally essential for it as him having food. Fate adheres to his request and takes it to a blacksmith for all the necessary modifications. After that, he realizes he has made more money in half day than what he saved up in the past 5 years, and that he has still more money left after paying the blacksmith. This makes him question how worthless his last 5 years have been working as a holy knight. He decides not to ponder about his past because he has already made the decision to move on. Greed admires his dedication and advises him to learn how to carry out maintenance himself, or else it would be troublesome in the future. Fate reveals he had to pay 10 copper for maintenance even when Greed had no scratches on it, which is a robbery. Additionally, he won't be able to find a blacksmith if he were to travel somewhere else, so he must come up with an alternate plan. Ultimately, he decides to purchase his own repair equipment after dinner, and Greed tells him to be extremely cautious with him as he is a proud weapon. He is Greed after all. Later, he decides to have an expensive meal since he has worked hard today and decides on meat to have for dinner. He comes by a restaurant that emits a strong aroma of cooked meat and decides to head there. Just then, a tall warrior bumps into him and slams him against the door. Fate notices the man forcefully dragging a weak and fragile girl and tries to stop him. The girl with tears in her eyes begs Fate to save her, and Fate, incapable to process the cruelty, freezes in one spot. As the man brutally drags the girl away, Fate realizes he isn't the girl's father and that the occurrence may be a case of abduction. He wonders who that man is and reviews his stats to discover that he has no skills, which is impossible because everyone is born with one. According to Greed, it must be a hidden skill, which, as the name implies, helps the owner to conceal their other skills. Greed asks Fate what he is going to do and states that he should be careful since his opponent is a warrior. His stats may be a little lower than Fate's, but his eyes are of a murderer. Upon hearing this, Fate is concerned about the safety of the girl and chooses to chase after them. He claims that he cannot act like he didn't notice anything, knowing that something is amiss and that he has to help the girl no matter what. Greed encourages him not to offer pity to those who do not hesitate to kill, which he comprehends, but he still believes is immoral to take a life, no matter how evil someone is. He claims he is no hero, nor does he want to be considered one, but if something unjust occurs in front of him, he has to take action. He pursues the man into a street and then to a warehouse, wondering what business he has in this kind of place. Greed speculates that he may be thinking about selling that girl to another individual, which would be the best case scenario for them as all the other options are much worse. He peeks into the warehouse through the broken window and sees that the man has chained up the little girl, verifying that it is an abduction. The man is a jerk who violently hit the girl and mocks her for the fact that her parents abandoned her because of her useless skill. Seeing her lying helpless on the floor reminds Fate of his own traumatic past, which causes him to lose his composure. The man reveals his plans for the girl, which is to turn her into a holy knight's plaything. He further reveals how the last girl didn't last more than a week and orders her to work harder than her before kicking her in the gut. Fate has endured plenty and intends to charge in, but Greed forbids him because he is no match for the skillful opponent who stands before him. He can't help anyone if he's dead. Therefore, he chooses to be stealthy about this assignment. As soon as the man walks out, he leaps through the window and assures the girl that he has come to rescue her. He cuts her chains open and asks her to flee the warehouse, but their escape attempt gets derailed when the man returns with an earnest smirk on his face. He asserts that killing the girl's rescuer in front of her will make her much more obedient, and he urges Fate to prepare for his death. Fate falls into the man's trap and freaks out upon understanding the seriousness of his predicament. It is extremely challenging for him to maintain custody of the girl while fighting, so he begins to consider every one of his possibilities. Just then, Greed instructs him to take the girl and move out of the way, which doesn't sit right with him. However, he realizes that he was able to swiftly sever the chains earlier with Greed, so he takes his advice. The man confidently pursues them to a dead end, where Fate asks the girl to stay behind while he confronts him. The man is confident in his skills and considers Fate foolish for marching him straight ahead. Fate, however, manages to cut past his blade and land a lethal cut on his torso, much to his amazement. Fate is taken aback to discover that greed can cut through anything, leading him to question what sort of weapon it really is. He then turns to face the man and menacingly inquires about the person who owns him. He has the ability to read people's minds, therefore he threatens to read his thoughts if he doesn't respond, thus hiding is pointless at this point. He claims to be working for Hub Blelik, which enrages Fate, and he vows to make them amend for their sins someday. As the man dies in his grasp, Fate receives additional stat points and 2 new skills, which are Concealment and Sharp Edge. Concealment enables him to hide his abilities from other appraisers, while Sharp Edge is an art that enables him to strike twice during a counterattack. Fate claims he is lucky his opponent didn't get to use it against him, or else it would have been him lying dead in his place. Following that, he turns to the girl and brings her to a restaurant to feed her dinner. After filling their stomachs, he converses with the girl and discovers that she is from an orphanage near the slums where Fate resides. When he arrives, he sees the nuns worried as they are unable to locate the girl. When he notices this, he asks her to go out on her own from here on, and she praises him for saving her life. As he leaves her with the nuns, Fate acknowledges that he has quite the journey ahead of him, and he has also scheduled an appointment with the Hart family tomorrow, which is making him extremely anxious. As he walks back to his residence, Fate contemplates what he will wear on his trip to the Hart household. The next day, Fate gets himself an appropriate outfit, and Greed jokes that even people like him can appear pleasant if they dress properly. The two proceed to Roxy's mansion, where Fate requests that the guard inquires about an appointment with Roxy. Upon confirmation, the guard invites Fate to accompany him inside, where he is astounded by the interior and beauty within the exterior walls. As he wanders through the garden, he speculates if all of the family members are at work because he sees no one around. The guard walks Fate to Roxy, who is also dressed properly for the occasion. Fate is taken aback by her appealing looks, and Roxy replies that she too wears clothes on occasionally. After a brief conversation, she asks him to accompany her, and Fate is astonished when he discovers that she has led him to her father's grave. She announces to her father's grave that she will be recruiting Fate, and that their home will be a little more lively from his presence. She then discloses that they only found out about his death 5 days ago, and that he died in Gallia, a monster-ruled southern continent. Gallia's monsters are exceedingly powerful, and those in the capital fade in contrast. This reveals to Fate that her father died before the attack on Blelik Palace, and that she was keeping something that was so awful hidden from everyone. She claims it was her father's responsibility to combat the monsters entering Gallia, but it was not the local monster who murdered her father. She introduces him to the living disaster in Gallia. It's a sky dragon with the same capabilities as a flood or an earthquake, which means there's no way to avoid the damage that it will unleash. This is why it is referred to as a living disaster. Roxy's father and his army were annihilated by the dragon, who arrived out of nowhere. The strange part is that the army was a long way from the heart of the nest, and no one expected the dragon to come out so far. In fact, such an incident has never occurred in decades, making Roxy even more suspicious. Roxy has only had a momentary break from the funeral arrangements and the process of inheritance, and the bitter smile on her lips shows Fate how much agony she's in right now. He does not see an unwavering holy warrior in front of him, but rather a little and frail girl mourning her father. As she promises to enhance the status of this mansion on her own, she calls Fate to assist her in her mission. Fate promises to remain by her through thick and thin with a new passion. A few days go by and Fate becomes acquainted with the Hart Mansion. He tries all kinds of jobs around the place, but gardening is what really fits him the most. He works at the mansion during the daytime and enjoys nice dinners with the entire family. However, as he consumes more and more, a voice within him becomes increasingly desperate. When Roxy notices him dozing off at the dinner table, she approaches him and inquires if he has overworked himself. She recalls what Roxy's touch did previously and moves back to avoid it. However, his gluttony kicks in, and he collapses from extreme hunger, only to wake up in bed with a letter from Roxy urging him to take the day off. He appears embarrassed to have passed out in front of Roxy and looks out the window to realize that he has slept throughout the whole day. He asks his sword Greed why this is happening to him, and he is told that the die is cast. His skill, Gluttony, grows stronger as he consumes more souls, and now that he's had a whiff of it, there's no stopping him. He also adds that Fate remains hungry due to its starvation mode, which can be recognized by the red glow in Fate's eyes. Greed says there is no way to stop it, but Fate suggests he stops the consumption of souls entirely. Greed tells him that he would either starve to death or harm others around him in order to consume more, making him realize the reality of the situation. As he puts on his combat attire, Greed informs him that he can have his temporary fun with the servant life, but he can never go back since the die is cast. Driven by his immense hunger, he runs outside the mansion in the middle of the night. As he approaches the guards, we observe that they are frightened by him, even though he means no harm. He shows them the note Roxy left him permitting his leave and later asks Greed why they were afraid of him. Greed reveals that it is due to his crimson eyes, which prey on those who are weaker than him, instilling terror in their hearts. He additionally explains how gluttony alters fate when he has starvation in order to absorb souls more effectively. He wonders if the guards thought he was unusual, but Greed states that everything will be okay given his ability is unheard of. It goes on to suggest that if he doesn't show them his red eyes again, they'll think he's hallucinating. As he wanders across the city, he detects a strong odor emanating from 3 cloaked citizens and attempts to follow them. He learns that they are Raphael and the others and wonders why they are sneaking around at night like this. He wants to watch the trio to learn what they're up to, but he must leave due to his increasing hunger. Another powerful odor comes from nearby hunters, who are about to slay sleeping creatures under the shining light of the moon. When Fate hears this, he resolves to do the same, and the hunters denigrate him for venturing out solo. He ignores their jeers and races into the woods, where he savagely slaughters scores of goblins. However, no matter how many he slays, it is never sufficient to satisfy his gluttony. After laying waste to a number of goblins, Fate's gluttony calms down only a little, which makes him wonder how much he will have to consume to satisfy it. His eyes are still crimson, indicating that he is still starving. So he chooses to hunt for stronger monsters, as goblins will not suffice. He believes he feels much stronger than before, and Greed reminds him that this is only because gluttony has enhanced his strength, allowing him to consume more. He decides to venture into the forest to battle the hobgoblins, who are tougher and more advanced versions of the typical goblins. They are of 3 categories: fighters, guards, and archers. Fate suggests he'll have little problems dealing with the first 2, but archers may pose serious issues since they attack from hiding. Their arrowhead is covered in their waste, which will poison all individuals who come into contact with it. In the forest, he comes across 2 sleeping goblins, one of which is a fighter and the other is the guard. He uses his appraisal to check their stats and manages to kill one of them in its sleep. The other goblin tries to call for reinforcements, but Fate luckily manages to kill it too before it could make the signal. After acquiring more stat points and new skills, Fate's eyes turn normal again, meaning he is no longer in starvation and can rest if he likes. Greed suggests he climb a tree since there are more hobgoblins around, and he should continue hunting on a regular basis if he wants to fulfill his appetite. He decides to return after a brief break, but gets startled by the loud thuds. They are coming from an enormous goblin who is dragging a human corpse with it. Fate figures it is one of the guys who mocked him earlier, since they were the only ones who were planning to hunt in the forest. After using his appraisal on the monster, Fate finds out that it is the Goblin King with extremely powerful stats and a skill called regeneration. An encounter with the king is extremely rare, but is almost always fatal for any ordinary hunter. Fate, on the other hand, is no average hunter. His stats are considerably high, and he could really use the king's skill, so he decides to go after it to eliminate it. As the king drags the corpse to his place of recuperation, Fate is dismayed to see it bite the head of the corpse's neck. Greed claims it was inevitable, but Fate is affected since experiencing something so horrific in person is much different than envisioning it. After retaining his focus, Fate circles behind the tree and launches a deadly attack on the Goblin King. He lands a clean strike that severs its arm, prompting him to celebrate his victory, which is cut short because the Goblin King is still breathing and ravenous. The Goblin King goes berserk and starts swinging his club, which Fate only barely avoids. Fate claims that if the club reaches him, he will die instantly, but Greed assures him that it isn't that powerful and that he should go on the offense. Trusting his weapon, he surges toward the Goblin King and manages to sever his other arm as well. As the king screams in agony, Fate seizes the moment to deliver a lethal strike into his throat, thereby killing him. After a near-death encounter, he obtains all of its stats as well as the regeneration talent and lays down to catch his breath. Just then, Greed reveals that it can take multiple forms by receiving stats from his wielder, and that Fate has now gained adequate points to unlock its first rank. He inquires about how many points it needs, and Greed tells him that it wants all of the points Fate has earned thus far in order to unlock its next form. Furthermore, if Fate chooses to keep the stats to himself and does not level up Greed, he will lose the ability to wield it. It issues an ultimatum to Fate, who immediately agrees to rank it up because Greed is his sole companion. When he concurs, the blade emits a dazzling glow and begins to hover in the air. Fate goes from having thousands of stat points to nearly none, but this opens a new form of Greed. Greed now has a magic bow structure, which may assist Fate in a couple of ways in the near future. He goes on to say that he has second and third rank as well, which will require even more stat points to access. As they chatter, Greed warns Fate of an incoming arrow from the shadows, which he avoids barely. Fate hides behind the corpse of the Goblin King after avoiding another arrow to observe where they are coming from. Greed suggests he aim it at them, and thanks to the new form, he only has to aim in the general direction of the target. Furthermore, the bow does not require arrows because the projectiles are generated by mana. Fate loads his weapon and fires at the target, which turns out to be an archer goblin. After slaying it with the bow, he gains additional stats and a new skill called night vision that enables him to see more effectively in the dark. He decides it's time to return home, but greed advises him to carry the Goblin King's head with him. He refuses to keep it for himself as it will draw too much attention, as he is only level 1 and leaves with a pouch of goblin ears. The next day, he wakes up in the mansion with a knock on his door, and outside is Roxy, who has gathered grapes for him. Fate starts panicking at her sight, who claims she only came to check up on him and brought food. She gives him fresh Heart Territory grapes and recommends he eats them for breakfast. Just then, Roxy gets dragged away by one of the maids, but not before she invites Fate to accompany him on a tour of her territory sometime soon. Fate blushes as he is treated with such regard despite his status as a commoner, and he reflects to himself how he needs to become more prominent in the community in order to assist her further. As he snaps out of his fantasies, he realizes that it is his day off and decides to go to the merchant district to have a few drinks. He glances around the stalls and spots a skull mask, which not only provides defense but also conceals the wearer's identity. Fate decides to take it to hide his true self as he hunts almost every day and night. Just then, he overhears some villagers mentioning an extensive amount of goblin corpses, claiming it is evidence of a dreadful monster. The locals say that the Blelick family is on the hunt for this monster, which reminds Fate of all their awful acts. He considers this a good opportunity to get down to the bottom of this case and expose the true colors of the Blelick family. Locals also discuss the killing of the Goblin King, claiming that a stranger severed its ears and dumped it in front of an orphanage in the slums as a donation. Because of whoever did this, the children there enjoyed great meals, which make Fate delighted because he was the one who accomplished it. Later that night, Fate hunts goblins with his freshly acquired face mask, and Greed praises him for balancing both his hunting and servant lives. Fate claims he does not want to fall into starvation again and recalls how he never found out what Raphael and the others were up to that night. He claims it's something harmful, but he has no idea what it could be. Greed claims that the gang is intelligent enough not to leave obvious evidence behind, prompting Fate to concoct a scheme to lure them out. Just then, he observes 3 novice hunters in the forest, determined to hunt hobgoblins at night. They are afraid of the rumors of the wandering monster, providing Fate with an ideal opportunity to frighten them, because doing so will draw additional attention from the Blelick family. He murders the hobgoblins in front of the rookies. He is also dressed in a dark cloak along with his scary face mask, which makes the rookies believe that he is a lich. Fate believes that Raphael and the others will eventually come for him if he keeps revealing himself like this. Just then, Greed warns him about someone approaching him at lightning speed, which pans out to be Goblin Queen. The queen is furious over the passing of the king and has come out to seek her revenge on Fate. She goes berserk and launches a blow at Fate, which he manages to dodge with ease. As she growls in anger, Greed asks Fate to be careful. However, he confidently attacks her with the bow and then proceeds to slash her into 2 pieces. His showy style draws the hunters once more, which will only aid his cause because all of this commotion will motivate the Holy Knights to act. A few days pass and Fate continues his dual life as both a servant and a hunter. The Holy Knights have remained silent until now, prompting Fate to have a conversation with Roxy for more details. Just then, he comes across Roxy by the gate. When he approaches her, she reveals that she has a super secret job for him. She orders him to accompany her in examining people, which will assist her understand the city's circumstances. Fate cheers her on for this brilliant idea, and she pulls him to be her escort. She takes him to the main city, and Fate is nothing but happy to see her smile like that, since she usually acts tough due to the nature of her job. As she inspects jewelry at a stall, Fate turns his attention to some raw gem ores. He uses his appraisal to see which of them contains a gem within and gifts it to Roxy as gratitude for everything she has done for him. Afterward, they come across an infant sobbing because he is parted from his mother. Roxy tries to console the child, but her Holy Knight aura overwhelms him, causing him to wail. Fate consoles the child and invites him to accompany them while they search for his mother. They grow hungry and eat with the boy after searching the entire city, but can't seem to locate his mother. It is already getting dark, so Roxy requests the kid to spend the night at her residence, but the kid cannot bear the thought of spending the night without his mother. As he sobs uncontrollably, we see a woman racing towards him from afar who turns out to be a boy's mother. As the two reunite, they express gratitude to Roxy and Fate for their assistance. After they've left, our duo shares a sweet moment which makes Fate blush, yet he tries to play it cool. Just then, Roxy states that the senior maid will berate them if they show up late, causing them to rush back to the mansion. On their way, Roxy recalls how she promised Fate she will take her to the tour of her territory and states that they will head out this weekend. As the sun sets on the day, Fate states he will be delighted to accompany her. The weekend is here, and Roxy and Fate are both traveling to her turf. She observes Fate's face, which shows concern, and asks whether he is opposed to visiting the Hart family grounds. Fate is preoccupied with the thoughts of the Blelick family, but he feels it is unfair to Roxy because he should be relishing his time with her instead of fretting about what's to come. Therefore, he clicks out of his worries and says that he is looking forward to their excursion. He goes on to express how wonderful the grapes she brought him the other day were, and Roxy describes how their land was never appropriate for cultivating crops to begin with. However, thanks to her people's tireless efforts, they were able to successfully cultivate this land, which has now become the crowning glory of the Hart family. Although these regions symbolize family treasures, monsters that are seeking rich harvests always keep hounding this vicinity. These are known as kobolds, who are problematic creatures that can easily overpower a common warrior and require the slaying of the seasoned veteran. They work in groups, much like their wolf-like looks, and ambushing them is extremely tough because of their keen sense of smell. After that, Roxy claims that one of the reasons why she trips these regions this time of year is to hunt these monsters and free their lands. Just then, she hears Fate's tummy growling, which embarrasses him, and he contemplates how his gluttony is reacting to the kobolds now that it is no longer satisfied by goblins. Just then, the chauffeur spots a pack of kobolds on the path, but Roxy steps out of the carriage to reveal that these are just the ordinary arrow wolves that reside in this area. She asks Fate to step aside and then slays them all with her sophisticated skills, which demonstrate her strength as a holy knight. After that, both of them arrive at their destination, and Roxy gets welcomed at the door by her mother, who inquires about their other guest, Fate. Roxy introduces him as her newly hired servant, and his mother presents herself as Aisha Hart. Fate recalls how he heard Aisha was suffering from an acute illness, yet she appears well and courteous despite her shortcomings. All of a sudden, Aisha asks Fate if he has feelings for her daughter, which embarrasses both him and Roxy. Aisha jokingly claims that she only meant to inquire about what the new employee thinks of his supervisor, and Fate states that he adores her immensely and would love to back her for the rest of his life. He understands that they both have very distinct living standards, but even if he gets an opportunity to be her servant, he is happy to do so. Just then, he notices Roxy all red and blushing, who excuses herself to her room, making him wonder if he said anything strange. After she's gone, Aisha asks Fate to look after her daughter, and he assures her that she can rely on him. Later that evening, Fate arrives late from grape harvesting and encounters a white-haired woman with the same red eyes as him when he is in starvation mode. He feels frightened at the sight of her and decides to use appraisal on her. Just then, she moves right in front of him, and Fate realizes he is unable to see anything about her. Fate inquires as to what she desires, and she responds that it is still too early. She arrived here to hunt for kobolds, but she leaves them to Fate, stating they'll meet again soon. Fate reflects on her red eyes as she goes away and questions if she is the same as him. Just then, Roxy arrives in search of Fate and questions why he appears so frightened. He tries to maintain his composure, but Roxy notices the white-haired woman and uncovers that she is a galleon. Fate recalls hearing about galleons and remembers that most of them became extinct a long time ago. Roxy discloses that galleons were the very first inhabitants of the continent of Gallia, and their distinctive characteristics were tanned skin and white hair. There even used to be a great nation called Gallia not long ago, but Roxy claims it is her first time seeing someone that resembles one of them. Following that, she suggests they head back home where Fate is welcomed to a feast. Accustomed to his servant habits, he gets excited to serve food to Roxy, but is taken aback when she asks him to take a seat next to her. The waiters force him into the chair, and he sits reluctantly beside Roxy until she encourages him to unwind and eat anything he wants. She is overjoyed to see Fate eat a lot, and one of the maids later praises him for making Roxy happy, as it has been a long time since they have seen her smile so brightly. At night, Fate gears up to go hunting and describes to Greed how he was unable to observe anything with the appraisal about the Galleon woman. Greed says she might have something special which she will soon understand. He subsequently encounters some kobolds and uses the appraisal to check their stats, which reveal that they have the strength up medium skill. Greed requests that he take the initiative, and Fate confidently smashes and slices through them with ease. After acquiring their stats and the new skill, Fate wonders why he was only able to locate only 2 of them. Greed claims that kobolds are undoubtedly on high alert as a result of what unfolded recently, which worries Fate as he hopes nothing tragic happens to his dear Roxy. Please read the pinned comment about the next part.